Okay, folks, I think we're about on time. It is on the hour. Wherever you are in the world, I'm sure it is on the hour. Thanks for joining. You're in for a real treat this next 45 minutes webinar entitled Beyond Zoom and Teams, Making High Impact Learning Programs Engaging in a Digital Format. You can expect a copy of this presentation in your inboxes next week. It will be around 45 minutes in duration. The folks have asked me if you have any questions at all, please click into the Q&A tab and submit your questions there. The presenters, Tony and Alan, will address some of them at the end of the presentation, or through as many as they possibly can go through. Also, please share your thoughts or introduce yourselves in the chat tab. Let us know where you are in the world and who you're with. And if you have any technical issues during the webinar, if I could say a webinar, that would be handy, please reach out via the Q&A tab. So folks, enjoy. So the next session, as I said, Beyond Zooms and Teams, your presenters, Tony Maguire, Regional Director, ANZ at D2L Australia. Tony's the Regional Director at D2L Australia, leading the team and executive level engagement across the ANZ region. I think he's based in Australia right now, Tony. And Alan is he's in Scotland, not far from me right now. Alan's the Director of Corporate Learning at D2L EMEA, and he's with us very late. It's 11 p.m. here, so he's burning the midnight oil. But without further ado, folks, over to you. Enjoy, everyone.
Thank you so much for that wonderful introduction, and my hat size has just gone up too, so thank you for that. Look, hopefully it will be an engaging and interesting session. Thank you for the opportunity to speak to the community. With us also is Jacqueline Mott. Jacqueline is our marketing manager for APAC. She is a tireless supporter of all the work that we do out of Singapore. So we truly have a global contingent here. There's also a couple of my team who've joined in the background. As you just heard, I'm the lead for ANZ, work out of the Melbourne office. Melbourne is our bricks and mortar office. First bricks and mortar actually after our headquarters in Kitchener in Ontario. So we've been in Australia for about 10 years. We have been working with all sizes of business. You'll see shortly a snapshot of who we work with. But in Melbourne, 35 folks, everything from network operations teams to tier 1, 2, 3 support, help desk, sales, marketing, and of course, our people and culture leaders. So we have a very vibrant and very large contingent here in Australia that's growing. We've just brought on 5 new hires, so it's an exciting time. We work closely with InvestVic, New South Wales Government, and we have close relationships with New Zealand Government as well, Ministry of Education and Treasury. So we are truly a kind of an impactful player in this space. And what we want to talk about today is really just share with you some of the things that we hear and we see in terms of what our clients are experiencing as they move beyond Zoom and Teams. Zoom and Teams was the go-to for everybody when COVID hit. Of course, everybody was in lockdown here in Melbourne. It was about 120 odd days. And everybody had to pivot. I'll speak about pivot a little bit more shortly. But the change in our lives was massive. We just want to make sure that we are clearly hearing and then reflecting back what we hear in terms of the aspirations of our partners now as they think about a couple of things. First of all, how do we move from survival back to growth? Second thing is we've made some decisions around technology, Zoom and Teams. What are the things we need to be thinking about going forward? And we'll speak about what that means in terms of a more considered approach to structuring learning in the workplace. And then the third thing is very much centered around the people side of things, the impact at the individual level. I'm going to share some research, which I think is really important to consider, because it speaks about the immediate changes that we are seeing in the 15 to 25-year-olds who are going to be many of those consumers, community partners, folks that we are working with over the next 2, 3, 5 years. The research I'm going to show you at a maximum is a 9-year window through to 2030. So I really hope that the takeaways are useful to you and do provide some level of confidence as you go forward, as you start to think about your strategy. So without further ado, I'll go to the next slide. So obviously 1,300 customers globally, 20 years of experience, 20 million users worldwide. We work with government departments. Here in Australia, we have implementations of 120,000 up to 250,000 users, down to schools of 500. So we really do span the gamut of the corporate, L&D and education space in many, many ways. Advisory creative services, yes, we can provide a whole variety of tailored and off-the-shelf services there. And our customer success model, I think, is quite important. There's a couple of case studies that might be of interest to you if you're interested in how we as a vendor work with our clients and the way that we invest with them. So globally, Ian, you might speak to this a little bit later, but we are in a number of global relationships with those folks there. Kaplan's been a really interesting one for us, PwC, Ernst & Young, Accenture, and that's just a snapshot of some of those, I guess, in a sense, global taillights that a lot of people pay attention to. Why programmatic? Well, programmatic learning is going to be something that we talk about in terms of that next step from Zoom and from Teams. So the research I'm going to show you will hopefully provide you with the evidence on which to think about the way that you structure or program learning in the workplace and the reasons why you would do it. Alan's got some fantastic real-world examples and anecdotes that he's seeing from his work internationally, especially in the EMEA space, as he works with corporates who are really facing the challenges we're going to speak about here and some of those responses. So I want to just quickly cover off 3 things here. The pivot, we talked about that change from a face-to-face through to fully remote. It happened overnight. And that means that we've had our heads down for a while. So I want to encourage everybody to pivot back from that looking down, just trying to whack-a-mole and move to that position where we're looking further down the road. We're looking further than our headlights. And that's what the research is about. I also want to talk about the job to do and the role of innovation here very quickly. If you have the opportunity, go and have a look at Clayton Christensen's work out of Harvard. He talked very deeply about that understanding that we need to have of what our customers or our clients truly need. And we have to understand and identify what they want to take away from the purchase or the use of our products. Whether that's an association, whether that's a large corporate who's doing workplace L&D. And if you're in the space where you're actually selling services, if you can identify those needs, consumers are willing to pay a premium for them. And then the last piece I want to talk about just briefly is the signature experience. Signature experience is so important because it provides opportunities to differentiate, monetize value for businesses. But really importantly, I want to draw the distinction. A lot of people say we want a Netflix experience. Netflix is great, especially for the first 90 days. But after the first 90 days, I got to a point where I just sit there for 20 minutes or half an hour just flicking through. I'd explore, but I didn't actually engage with the content in a meaningful way. So you want to move past that Netflix experience. It's great to look at. It's a very accessible and easy way to find content. But we also want people to engage with content that has some structure, because as you're going to see, there's a lot of research that talks about the skills that are being developed in the workplace, but there's no way to map them. There's no way to explain them and communicate them if you are an employee to show the value that you've built. It's important we have some structure around that so that we can actually communicate that value. Quickly, pivoting in the Australian workforce. If you're in one of those regions that McKinsey has called out there, tourism through arts, recreational services, these are the key industry segments that have been affected by COVID. But post-COVID, as we move out of that, there are going to be some ongoing business cycle effects, lower spending per customer, lower exports perhaps, especially in the education space, tourism space, arts and recreational services. And also there are some underlying structural changes. So those successful businesses now are thinking about two things. They're thinking about what it means to become a learning organisation. How do we position learning as a core value proposition of what we do? Those businesses are then thinking about how are we operating now. We jettison what we don't need. We're paring back and being very clear about what we are now delivering, the value proposition there. At the core of all of this has to be a reassessment of the service and learning design that we apply to the activities that we want our workforce, our customers to engage in. Traditionally, there's been a very defined job to do, defined pathways. You go through primary school, you go into secondary school, you then maybe go and get a trade, maybe you do some additional credential work, higher education. After that period, you've done your trade or you've moved into higher ed, maybe you've got a degree, you go back to the workforce, and then there's professional industry associations. It was reasonably linear. The research that I'm about to show clearly details the complexity of that journey now, and it's only going to become greater. Things like micro-credentials. You've heard so many of these kinds of high-level phrases. It's important that we understand that the traditional defined pathway is almost a thing of the past. You'll see there the clients that we work with in those traditional pathways now. We are working with every single one of them, funnily enough, as they start to deal with the complexity of the changing relationship they have with their students, with their customers, with their workplace employees, because of that complexity. And Alan will be able to share some of that a little bit later. The research I want to share with you is around the Foundation for Young Australians. They've been doing a research series now for since about 2015. They released the first one. I would really recommend you go and have a look at that research if you have the opportunity. I'm going to touch on some of the key takeaways that I think any business, large, small, school, large, small, or government department, large or small, should be thinking about, because there are immediate implications for the employees and for the workforce. First of all, we talked about this before, the pathways that learners, employees have now is much more complex. I was speaking to some associations the other day, and associations have traditionally had a longer term engagement with members. Now we're in a situation where today's 15 to 20-year-olds will experience and have to navigate 17 changes in employers across 5 different careers. What's the implication for a union? What's the implication for an association? What's the implication for us as employers? Traditional full-time work is also becoming increasingly out of reach for young people today. We could glibly talk about the gig economy and the flexibility that provides. But I remember, I think it was Paul Sheridan from the Australian talking about and using the term precariat for that group of part-timers now, young people in the workforce who will struggle to find meaningful long-term employment that is stable. We need to think about that as an outcome for the situation we're in today. And how do we actually start to build in some trust and confidence? Because whilst many young Australians don't have that prospect of long-term employment in one job for a long, long time, also more young Australians are opting for more flexible working lifestyles. So it's important we understand that. Where will we be in the next 10 years? We go back to that original defined pathway. You can see now why the complexity is starting to build in. Signature experience. Let's just have a think about this for a moment. Where we see our partners being most successful when they compete in their market spaces, we see a few things. First of all, they understand that the relationship between work, learning, and career and financial success has changed. They're embracing the opportunities for automation, but they also recognise that automation of the routine, of the everyday is going to be a high order priority for them as businesses to bring the efficiencies they require. What do they need from their workforce? They need trained employees who are smart, who can solve problems explicitly. The mere completion of tasks is no longer sufficient, nor is application of knowledge. sufficient. Valuable employees now are those who can synthesize information from various sources and create new knowledge that provides a competitive advantage. That's critical. This research piece from one of Foundation for Young Australians looks at that 9-year window. So this is on our doorstep now. What are the implications for businesses? What are the implications for associations, for schools, for universities? Brand is all. The value proposition that your brand provides gives you a competitive edge in the space. I'll give you 2 examples there. First, and we'll speak to one example a bit later around TAFE Queensland, but Victoria University here in Melbourne moved to a block model. They totally turned the first year framework traditionally for first years going into university on its head. You do one subject only at a time for 4 weeks and you do 10 of them across the year. They have seen massive improvements in engagement, student success, and outcomes for their students across the first, second, and third years in excess of what other universities have seen. And they've done that with one of the more challenged socioeconomic groups in Australia. Students coming in do not have some of the higher income rates. They're working in multiple jobs. Their circumstance is not as positive in many areas as some of the other universities here in Melbourne, but their outcomes are absolutely top-notch. That produces value. The students are loyal and they stick with that university. Their stickiness around micro-credentials and other products that university is now rolling out is increasing. That provides them the opportunity for stronger engagement, which they've been able to monetize. So there's revenue opportunities. I just want to quickly cover off a couple of other things then. If we talk about signature experience, I talk about the Foundation for Young Australians. TAFE Queensland have taken that very much to heart. They are now working with FYA to identify industry spaces where there are urgent skills needs, autonomous vehicles, drones. Whilst Deacon's doing some of that work down in Geelong, again, Deakin, one of our clients, Queensland TAFE is looking to find ways to build a framework to understand what these new skills mean, the portability of those skills across multiple career paths, and how you then roughly align them to national standards. That's an incredibly important piece of work because it will potentially power what we do as a nation in the recognition of and compensation for skills that have been built by learners. Last thing then, I just want to touch on another one of our clients looks at learning in a totally different way again. And I think the last piece there is really important. They want to take a corporate learning experience in a government department and make it so accessible that you can consume content when the barista's making your coffee. You can see there, this is a big business. 1,000 line managers, 22,000 employees, $3 billion budget. And they are looking at a mobile-first strategy, fully responsive design. Why? Alan's about to share some of that information with us. The last piece of information I want to share with you is this, and I think this is the most compelling. Once upon a time, when I had less grey hair, I had a dream job, that was to teach. And I love teaching, I did it for 15 years. But what we're seeing today, again from research from the Foundation in their New Work Mindset paper released in November 2016, is that there are 7 dream clusters. You can see them there, designers, technologists. So there's no more dream job, maybe a dream cluster. But this is the important piece. Young people training in work on one job, they acquire skills that will get them 13 other jobs. Again, I come back to the complexity of what happens in learning and how we map that. It's impossible to effectively understand, map, and communicate that without the right tools. And it's also impossible to move people through a structured framework easily without a level of technological structure underpinning this. And this is where D2L has done a lot of research in the space of programmatic learning. And Alan, you've seen a huge amount of change in the EMEA space. And we talked the other night about these top 10 skills. And I just wanted to hand over to you now. I'll keep driving the slides, but would love to hear what you're seeing in the EMEA space, especially with those large corporates. And if any of the messages that we've seen here with the research are resonating.
Yeah, absolutely, Tony. I mean, obviously, you know, a lot of the organisations that you mentioned, things and some of the current issues that are happening, you know, are very localised. I mean, the skills that we're seeing emerging as being the critical skills now that have been brought about by disruptive technology coming into our daily lives are global. You know, I mean, this is the research from the World Economic Forum that was just published at the end of 2020, and I mean, these are the types of skills that we're going to need in the next 4 years. You know, it's soft skills, it's hard skills, technology, all of these things are coming to the fore. These are the reasons that people are going to get hired for jobs. These are the reasons that people are going to need to move into the workforce. These are the reasons why the current workforce will need to be upskilled. So if you go to the next slide. I think this was pre-pandemic that I was reading this report. I'll go and talk a little bit about the impact of the pandemic, and obviously it's relevant right now. But this is a really interesting report. It's well worth a read. It's a bit of a heavy lift, but you know, there's been a lot of thinking for a while, and it was something that I was looking at quite a lot. Was that the time it takes to upskill people on those emerging skills, these hard skills, these technical skills, the soft skills, the nuances of them, the subtlety of them, the expectations that learners have, the way our lives and work and the workforce and offices and things, the way they're decentralized, the way that's all organized now, it's taking longer and longer and longer to train people. And at first, when you hear it takes 10 times more in 4 years, well, you know, that's the type of thing that makes you want to open the report and read it, right? But if you kind of read in behind it, it makes sense, you know, like it's getting harder to train people. You can't just send everyone to, you're going to this room at this set time. You know, there's all sorts of complications have come in here, and the skills are becoming more complex to train people on. Go to the next slide. There's been like a lot of advances in learning, and a lot of advances have been driven by technology. And, you know, I like this quote from Berson. You know, I think Josh Berson really captures the sentiment of our industry really well. And, you know, saying like, despite all these new things, digital content being everywhere, like structured solutions for learning are still being used. And that's because they work. So although we're seeing on one hand traditional training methods taking longer to train people, there is still a sort of need for some type of structured solution. So if you go to the next slide, I want to just talk a little bit about the impact of COVID-19 here, because we're just kind of setting the context here, and I just put this up for a bit of fun, because we've been looking at a lot of heavyweight stats and things, so you can see obviously, and I think everyone will identify with this. It would be interesting to see. I think you're a bit further ahead. A lot of people in different regions here, probably from, you know, Australia, New Zealand, different parts of the world. Certainly in the UK, I'm still in lockdown at the moment, so I'm still very heavy on the internet usage and very low on my car usage and very heavy on my sweatpants usage. But, you know, joking aside, if we sort of like go to the next slide, we've all had to pivot, as you know, as Tony said, like the current situation, it was happening anyway. We were having to pivot to more of a digital context, more of a digital approach to work, to learning. You know, all these macroeconomic trends, disruptive technologies in the workforce, you know, all these need for skills, reskilling, upskilling the workforce, they were all happening anyway, but everyone's had to pivot overnight at the start of the pandemic to digital, right? And obviously now it's starting to come back to sort of in person again, but I don't think it's been particularly pretty. You know, the way that most people have pivoted, they've went to just delivering traditional training on Zoom or on Teams, and we've all kind of suffered from the after effects of that, and not just, you know, mute all the time. If you go to the next slide, please. So these are some of the challenges. If you've done a bit of a fast pivot, right, to delivering online, so using Zoom or using Teams and things like that, there's a few trends, and these are things that we've been sort of working with customers to try to overcome, and other people that we've we've been talking to, and also what we've been experiencing internally as a reasonable sized sort of global company with a workforce that's actually grown by more than 25% through the pandemic. With these different types of digital programs that are suddenly just delivered like this, there's a real loss of connection and collaboration between sessions. If you're in a leadership program and you see everyone once a month for 12 months, right, there's quite a connection builds up there, and a lot of collaboration happens around about the actual live sessions. But when you have that in digital, it literally, as soon as the Zoom thing finishes, that's it, you physically break the connection and literally do it. There's a lot of reduction in practice. People seem to be getting worse at doing their homework between the sessions, and I don't mean just go off and write a case study for this or blah, blah, blah. Like actually getting out there and practicing things, because not as many people have been getting out there. And okay, I know that like people are starting to become more mobile and things are more open now, and they can start to do that. But like this is a bit of a hangover from these digital digital delivery programs. People are there's less of structure and guardrails to actually get people out there and practice things. Obviously, if you pivot quickly, then a lot of organizations have maybe got an LMS, they maybe got like an LXP, they're using Zoom, they're using Teams, they might be using Webinar Jam or something else. You've got a portal where there's some information, stuff's getting emailed out, people have got things in their calendar, and managing all that and organizing it so it's actually a cohesive program. Whereas before it was literally like, yeah, you're on this course, last Thursday of the month, we're going to here, this is what's happening there for the day, we've got dinner in the evening. Like if we're doing a structured learning program, I keep going back to this leadership program, it's very much more challenging to administer and manage that type of thing, even just the basic sort of logistics of it and where the different things are. So then it's no surprise for the user that it's a very disjointed experience, because the things are kind of all over the place. There's not really a particular home for things. Your Outlook calendar should be where a lot of it is. Actually, I've got stuff over here and stuff over there and so on. So next slide, please. So when we're starting to think about what does the kind of future of this look like, and Tony mentioned the concept of programmatic learning, and this is a sort of framework we're going to talk about a bit more in a second. But the problem that we've been working on is that what we've been trying to solve for here is that like people have had to get more digital with learning, right? But actually what's been happening, this slide started to build itself, so move on, Alan. But what's been happening with digital learning in the past is that most of the LMS technology has been centered around about 5 to 10% of the learning experience. So e-learning, content, compliance courses and things. What's actually happened as a result of the pandemic is accelerated the jump to everything being digital, right? And it's not been particularly pretty. Obviously, like the use of the physical classrooms dropped down. You've had the LMS usage has spiked up a little bit, and obviously as people start to go back into the workplace, kind of spiked up again. I'll probably go back down a bit. But if you hit next, please. You'll find a lot of organizations have been finding other learning tools have been coming to the fore, like a learner experience platform or an LXP. So that's somewhere where you go for just-in-time learning, just-in-time support. So, I need to know what is the disciplinary procedure? What is the, someone's, what's the best way to, we've got to remote onboard someone, like what assets do we have on onboard? I need to put something together. The LXP can be a great resource for finding things and solving problems just in time. And what I think we've seen over this last period that we've been through in the past year is that we've seen an increase in frequency and more intense spikes in usage in that type of platform. Like, I have a problem right now, I need to go and solve it, and this is the thing that solves it for me. The other thing we see as well, like virtual meetings, we're in one right now, it goes without saying. I don't know if the virtual biscuits at the start were any good. But I think that usage will continue over time, like, and obviously now that things, opening back up and so on, even still, I think we'll still have quite a lot of virtual meetings. I think people will be, less inclined to travel because a lot of people have had, more than a year of this adapted way of working. So if you kind of hit the next one, what we think is that we think there's actually space for, right, so we've all had a go at like doing a lot of stuff in Zoom and Teams and 100% digital. We've got our LMS, we've got our LXP, we're doing virtual meetings and things, but actually we need to now think, right, what's the next step? What's the big idea for learning? How do we take like not just the 5%, the 10% that was in the LMS or the LXP and make those resources and digital content a bit more useful? How do we take the whole learning experience? How do we take the learning, the flow of work, the stuff you do, you know, informally in presentations where you get feedback, the one-to-ones, the presentations, the group work, the challenges, the leadership program that you're on. How do we take all that and wrap it up into some type of digitally driven program experience? And we think that programmatic learning is this framework, and we see that this is going to increase over time, and it's not going to set the world on fire straight away. It's going to gradually build up and build up. And this is the thing that people are going to start to wake up to and do after, you know, we say, right, okay, we need to stop doing all these Zoom and Teams things. You know, we need to go and think a bit more strategically about how we do digital learning. So if you go to the next slide, get that one into it. So we're going to now start to kind of explain what this framework is. So programmatic learning, there's a couple of things I want to say about this to set some context. So a digital learning platform is great because it can bring learning to where a learner is, but it can also take them to where they want to be. So sort of like a vehicle. So the LXP is really great at serving you information just when you need it. But actually having a structured journey for a complex skill, like if I need to learn to develop in Python, right, that's quite a journey that I need to go on. So having a structure that can take me along that journey is very useful. Programmatic learning is a framework that we have for doing a complex upskilling or reskilling program in a digital context. It's not just about having a portal. A lot of people run a leadership program and they'll put up a portal on SharePoint or on their internet or whatever it is, and that's where you got all your stuff for the program. That's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about more than that. We're talking about an enabler. Go to the next slide, please. So if we think about what are these programs, so I kind of hinted a little bit at leadership there. I talked about me learning to develop in Python. I'm not sure that's ever going to happen. But technical skill upgrading, soft skill training, communication skills, these are the types of reskilling and upskilling programs that organizations need to tackle for in their organization. These are the types of things that, you know, the higher education and further education are trying to prepare people for as they move into the workforce. But actually it's the companies who've got, you know, the hard lifting to do really to get people up the curve in these areas. So if you go to the next slide. So our approach to actually tackling this challenge we talked about is this concept called programmatic learning. So there's a few key elements to it. So first of all, like a personalized guided journey. So I think we're all pretty much, if anyone's done anything with digital learning, or digital technology, I think we're all on the same page that people want personalization. People find personalization of an experience much more engaging than just generic stuff. So, and that's one of the big benefits here. If we can serve like content and journeys to people that's more personalized to their particular skill level, their experience, their interest level, you know, like, you know, Alison that works in the IT department doesn't need to sit through like a 10-minute explanation about what an SSL certificate is in a cybersecurity course because she learned it when she was at university. So just being able to personalize that learning experience for her and take some of the basics out of the journey would be much more satisfying for Alison in her scenario. It should be people and interaction focused. So much of digital learning is a one-way play of content. You're just getting the hairdryer all the time, you know, to come one-way play of information at you. People learn best when they learn together. And when you're trying to learn a complex skill, you must have the opportunity to collaborate with people and, you know, learn through reflection and through practice with them. Real world practice is critically important. So that is now you learn this, you know, go off and do it and actually use it and work. And with digital learning, you know, it doesn't, you know, it's quite easy to disconnect, like read this and then go off and do something. But actually, used in the right way, we can use a digital learning platform to create more engaging experiences that create practice opportunities. You might send people off to do something. You might create a group activity. You might build an online challenge where there's 4 or 5 people that are all working together to actually create like a, you know, a hackathon or something that's in the platform. So it's an actual vehicle that moves them through and allows them to practice. Feedback's critical. We all know that. Feedback happens probably more easily when you're there physically in person. But when you're doing it in a digital context, you have to be more thoughtful and more deliberate about how you open up the channels for feedback. The big reservation that people have about getting feedback in a digital context is they need to feel safe. You need to know that like they're not going to be criticized. They need to know that like people are not just going to be, you know, tearing them down on some forum that all their colleagues are going to see that when they made a mess of their presentation. So it's really important that you create the right culture, the context, the security and the structure round about that so that someone can get feedback. But if you do that right, you know, somebody sitting here in, you know, Scotland, the other side of the world could be working with, you know, Tony and the Australian team who could be giving me feedback on, you know, my presentation when I finish it and telling me, you know, some notes and timestamp feedback and things. And then when I wake up in the morning, I can go in there and get this feedback and line that all up. So I think it's really critically important in digital as a role there. One of the last things I'm going to say about this as well is like, I know like when the pandemic first hit, one of the things that I really hated about it was the lack of like spontaneity, right? Like when you were going to have a social event, it had to be on Zoom and you're going to start having fun at 7 o'clock and you're going to have it in a quiz format. There's going to be 6 rounds and it was going to be finished by 9. And it was really like, I felt really restricted by that. But when you actually think about how do you make a digital learning experience energizing and engaging and motivating, you do actually need to put a bit of structure around it. You do need to have a bit of organized fun, right? You need to sort of like set some guardrails, put some things in there, you know, and actually give those opportunities, you know, to actually say, right, and people, we talk about using gamification in digital learning to do this. And as soon as you mention this, a lot of people say, oh, you know, it doesn't resonate with our learners. They're not wired like that and things. But I think that people need to go back and revisit the concept of gamification. It's not just silly characters, you know, unlocking acorns and, you know, winning rings and things like that. There's much more to it. There's game theory here. There's nudges, there's incentives, there's levels, there's badges, there's progression, there's micro credentials. There's so much that you can do to drive and motivate people through these programs. And it's baked into everything that we do in our daily lives. All the notifications, the nudges, the indicators and things, the levels and progress and things that we see on our mobile devices. And with all of this happening in a digital platform, you're surrounded by so much more data than you could ever have before. I mean, a lot of people kind of joke about the amount of, you know, data that you get from feedback forms at the end of, like, you know, you do a really in-depth, really heavyweight session for 3 days, face-to-face with people you've lived and breathed and had dinner and breakfast and all that with them and stuff, you know, and then you get like, you know, a few boxes ticked in like 2 sentences at the end of the day before people run off to the airport. You don't really get a lot of data and feedback points, but actually in a program experience and a digital learning experience, it's so much more data. And it's really, really important that you have that data, not just because it helps you make strategic decisions, but how do you improve it for the future, but actually how you deal with things as you go. You know, like you can actually see who's struggling, who needs help, who's getting it, who's not getting it, who's engaged, who's not engaged. You know, you can see people's digital body language as we go. So I think there's, you know, this is just our concept for what this next phase of digital learning looks like, we call programmatic learning. So if you go to the next slide, and we're almost the last one. Oh, I'm not sure what's happened there. I don't know if it's Tony frozen.
Tony, are you there?
I think Tony might be frozen.
Okay.
But looks like he's gone.
He's gone
Okay.
all together.
No problem. We only have one more slide to go, but maybe
Maybe it
what we
might be
could
an
do.
opportunity, Alan. Some of the questions. I know there were a number
That's
of
what I was going to
questions.
say. Yeah, why don't we switch into the questions now?
Have you got access to them, or should I shout them out?
Yeah, if you want to shout them out, that would be great.
We've got a question from Leah Martin. What's the timescale on the future of workplace learning delivery slide?
The future of workplace delivery slide. That is a good question.
Do you know that one, or should we pass and wait and see if we can get them back in?
That was the one. I've actually got slides here. I think that was the oh yeah, okay, so my crazy graph. I'd forgot that I titled it that. Yeah, so my thought is that's the next 18, that's the next 12 to 18 months, right? Like as we, and obviously that's generalized at a global level. So as we start to come out of the as we start to come out of the the pandemic, and various different places open up, and I think we'll probably go into more lockdowns and things like that in different places. But I do think that will be the next 12 to 18 months. This is what it'll pretty much look like. We'll have some return to offices, maybe some shutdown, more change in regulations, and it'll be a bit of a spiky scenario.
Cool.
Okay.
Cool. Thanks for that, Leah. We've got a question from Mariana. Good morning. How would you apply programmatic learning for firms such as professional services? I think they're a legal firm. Mariana works for a legal firm. It seems customization is key, and that's fantastic. I'm thinking of timing for 200 plus employees. What would be the time frame for that?
Yeah, I think that's a really great point, Mariana. So we actually work with one of the clients we work with is actually one of the largest professional services firms in the world, and they use concept of programmatic learning globally in their organization. And their approach to this is, if anyone's running a high impact learning program, then this is the platform. This is the home for it. This is where they're doing it. And it doesn't matter whether it's, they obviously have a lot of professional services firms, a lot of like partner development tracks and things. There's like talent development. They've got like sort of graduate development programs. They've got leadership programs. They've got programs about bringing disruptive technology into the workforce. And yeah, a lot of them have got more than 200 employees in one of these programs at any one time. In fact, some of them have got thousands of employees in these programs at one time. But I think the key to that there, though, is that it depends on what your goals and objectives are with them. You can segment those much larger groups up into smaller cohorts. I mean, one of the goals and objectives, certainly with one of the sort of global professional services firms that we work with, is cross-territory collaboration. And working together in a digital learning program, it's an ideal way to foster that. If they want to go after new projects and win new business, it might be that their, AI experts are all based in, they're all based in Stockholm and Sweden, but yet their data science people are based in, Sydney and Australia, and they've got some analysts that are based in London or somewhere like that. So actually fostering collaboration between those teams as part of a learning program could be an ideal way to do that. And we typically see, to answer your question about timeframes, learning programs can really vary, vastly in time, but generally, something's like a sort of 2 to 3 days in a classroom, you can easily see that extended for, several weeks in a digital context, because you can allow people to sort of lead into live sessions. You can allow them a lot more time. And some of the ways that you would do that in terms of theories and formulas, and probably don't have time to get into all the nuts and bolts of it right here, but thinking about breaking apart, like a lot of the face-to-face, classroom delivery is explaining technical concepts. People can read that stuff and watch a video about it, in advance of a live session, and then you can prioritize the discussion and the collaboration and the those types of things for a live session. So there would be some very basic sort of formula things. Okay, conscious of time and more questions, and Tony is back with us as well.
Tony, I know that you're back. Sorry, something happened then. A couple of questions we've had was very similar. One from Caitlin and one from Zoe. Oh, sorry, Karen. Do they actually personalize? Do they work with LMSs, aggregators? I know they've mentioned Degree there and also Cornerstone.
Yeah, no, great questions. I think we see programmatic learning as a structured approach. It's a framework that allows you to make sense of all of those things that we talked about. So this kind of plays into what Ben asked also about the needs elements such as education, function, executive and IT. So there's alignment around leadership through to the coalface experience. It's not so much the platform itself, while each of the platforms will have specific functions and capabilities, and Cornerstone perhaps is more tied into HR kinds of functions. When you think about becoming more of a learning organisation, that concept of mobile, just in time, is really important. So it's not so much the platform, it's the way you think about it, the strategy and the technical deployment that's important. It's understanding those drivers and then coming up with a strategy which is evidence-based to improve the services to your stakeholders. I think that almost goes back to Amy's original question. What about the length? I talked about that example of 1,000 line managers. That was a fairly significant piece of learning over some time. I think some of those pieces went for 6 to 12 months. But the actual components that were required to be done were at the micro level. So it's, again, how you slice and dice and repurpose content specific to the needs of the moment. Now, if you have a platform that allows you to do the credentialing, it allows you to think about social learning, bubble that up and report back on a way that's meaningful to learners, a snapshot of what I've got to do today for managers, where's my team, that's what you're looking for. So not from a Cornerstone or from a Brightspace perspective, have you thought this through in terms of what each of your stakeholder groups is going to need? Hopefully that gives an overarching answer to all of those questions. I didn't get to Helen's, however. Case study on leadership. Look, yes, I can. We can talk about more of that last experience. And look, just to be clear, that last 1,000 line managers, that was Queensland Health. So happy to talk to you after the fact, maybe, Helen, if you have an interest.
So I'm not sure how pushed we are for time here, but I mean, just to quickly speak to, someone asked the question, like any suggestions how to gamify or make technical learning more engaging for a cohort of lawyers? I feel like I just have to jump on that one because it seems like someone's throwing that out there as a bit of a sort of like challenge. So I think there's a really interesting case study, actually. It's up on our website with that Kaplan Financial did with in partnership with us and with PwC, and they actually gamified a whole bunch of technical learning for accountants. So you wouldn't exactly think that those two would be sort of happy bedfellows, but the interesting thing that they did about it, and the thing that got the huge results and actually provided some very useful data, is they didn't just have points, badges and leaderboards for who got the highest score, because we knew that only the academically best people would rise to the top of the leaderboard. What they actually did was they said, here's the context, this is what good behavior, learning behavior looks like. We're interested in people who are diligent, people that have got grit, people that have got determination. We're going to give you points for this type of behavior. So people that submitted their assignments early, people that took 5, 6, 7 attempts to get the top result in the class, people that would constantly go back and practice and retry and retry and retry and retry, people that consumed all of the content, actually went into everything and checked it out, people that participated in discussions that helped peers So all of this type of behavior, they gamified all that type of stuff. And the engagement out of that was brilliant. And the data that they got out of it was even more interesting, because as they started to, in a professional services firm, think about how do we get a more diverse talent pool to promote for succession planning. Well, you actually start to look for these skills and attributes. What makes someone adaptable to break new markets or leverage disruptive technologies and things? Well, they need to have different skill sets, they need to have different mindsets and things. And so that actually opened that up. There's actually quite a lot that you can do. They had a bit of fun with it, and they actually made up silly badges like Mr. T accounts and you know, the various other accounting jokes, which I won't go into right now because we're out of time. But they had a little bit of fun with it as well. So there's always ways that you can do it if you think creatively about it.
I think there's another piece to this too. It's the way in which you think about the content. So obviously the content can sometimes be dry, it can be really engaging. You think about, do we build it? Do we buy it? Maybe we take a hybrid approach. Also think about who are the partners that we work with who can help us co-develop, co-author, and even co-badge, so that there's more cachet attached to the learning itself. I remember doing some work with the university I was consulting to at the time, and they were looking to break out of the traditional. They wanted to do some work in the iOS app development space. So what they did was they actually partnered with some local app shops in Melbourne, co-authored, built the content in collaboration with those app builders, those local businesses here in Melbourne. And then they informally benchmarked the outcome and said, if you complete this course, you'll basically be at a junior or an entry-level iOS programmer's level. Now, these companies are looking for these kinds of resources. And they said, additional to that, we're also going to provide you with social opportunities and mentoring opportunities where some of these leaders who've helped us co-author this content will be mentoring in the program. So they not only had exposure to content, understood the benchmarking for it, they also had exposure to potential employees or people that they would potentially respect in the space as a thought leader or a business leader that they could network with.
Yeah, and it's really interesting in here. There's people have asked for examples and sort of saying, well, like, is this something I can do in Cornerstone? How is this different from some type of AI driven like aggregator like Degreed or something like that? I think the answer is to those types of things is what we're saying here is that your traditional LMS is very good for doing compliance type learning, sort of playing content at people, getting a score for it, taking that, reporting, analysing, you know, that type of thing. It's really good for that. Your LXP, your AI-driven search aggregator type tool, your Degreed, your Edcast, your, you know, all these other options are fantastic for, I need to learn about this. I'm interested in, so completely self-directed learning. People want to go off and find things and look for stuff and explore stuff and all that. They're great for that. If you've got a complex skill that you need to upgrade, right? Someone says, right, I want to become a better leader. Then, and you're as an organization, you know, well, we know what that looks like, right? There's certain things that you need to learn. There's communication skills, there's planning, there's, you know, financials, there's, you know, all of these different things. We're going to package all that up. You might spend some time off on Cornerstone because you're going to have to take a business ethics course. We might send you off to go and look up some content and then bring that content back, you know, and use that in some group work. The programmatic learning platform is a way to structure that entire journey, right? It's a framework that you can do that. And a lot of customers we work with actually, they use Cornerstone. They have their own LXP as well. You know, so this is, if you think about just a learning program and it's a holistic, it's a home for where everything is, and it can integrate with all the different systems and put it together. That's what we're saying is the role here. And yes, I think there is a lot of overlap with, you know, education and sort of the virtual learning environment there. I mean, that's really where a lot of this has came from. But as people start to innovate on the whole learning experience, so not just the digital, the LMS, make the LMS better or make the LXP better, people start to think about the whole learning experience. These type of programmatic platforms, this is where they're going to come to the fore and tie everything together.
We were speaking with a learning designer last week. Now, this learning designer has a master's in learning design, adult learning, vocational learning, but has had to do a Cert 4 for various roles that he has taken on. He's had to do a Cert 4 times. And it's literally the same thing over and over again, but to satisfy the entry requirements for the roles that he's filling, he has to refresh that. And he was just reflecting on the fact that the lack of portability, the lack of general understanding for some of these as he moves from role to role has been a challenge. It's not so much that there's not a national framework for understanding it, it's that businesses don't always recognise these more benchmarked statements of competency, certainly in his case. The other thing is what happens when you leave a company that's using a cornerstone or it's using something else. What's the portability of that evidence, the portability of those credentials in an open sort of framework? And that's why the concept of badging is important, a more public facing view of that, so you can show the portability of and the evidence based to the credentials that you say you have. That's another important piece to it as well. How do you evidence it in a way which is broadly accepted and recognised?
Folks, I think we are coming to a close. We are bang on an hour, 56 minutes. That was a fantastic presentation. As I said at the beginning, this is being recorded, so you will receive the slides and the recording in your mailbox next week. I know that the folks would also love to hear from you if you have any questions, so please reach out to them. We've got the details of Tony and Alan, and also if you want to, folks, if you want to put your email addresses in the chat, then I'm sure folks can just contact you directly, Tony and Alan. Thank you. Oh, there we are. There we go. We can see this behind us. They're there right in front of my eyes. Thanks, folks. Thanks, Alan. Thanks for joining us. I know it's late where you are. You'll be ready for bed now. Tony, have a wonderful day. Thanks, everyone, for joining us. I hope you found that very useful. I certainly did. So have a wonderful day wherever you are in the world, and we will hope to see you very, very soon. Speak to you soon. Thanks a lot, everyone.
Thanks all.